Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. This is the first conference I'm attending as a speaker, which is not limited to students, so this is kind of a big thing for me. So I'm very happy to be here. What you can see here in this screenshot from Horizon Zero Dawn is a pretty good example of one of the things that I'll be talking about today, namely the romanticized ruin. Even more interesting, if you look into the background, you can see, if you look a little more closely, two stages out of the stages of two men riding horses. These stages exist in real life. They are called the Pikes Peak Range Riders, and they're located in the city of Colorado Springs. So since all of you probably have read the title of the presentation now, I'll see, yeah, it works, great. I'll give you a quick overview of the things that I'll be talking about today. I'll start with a short theoretical foundation, mainly focusing on the semiotic works of Umberto Eco and Roland Barthes. Pascal will probably know more about it than I do. I'll try to keep it very brief, but yeah, it's the theoretical foundation of this. There will be a short intermission going into contemporary debates in architecture concerning shelters. I'll also try to keep that brief, but I think it's important due to its political implications. And then I'll look at three case studies. Starting with the theoretical foundation, Umberto Eco wrote a text sometime during the second half of the past century called Function and Sign, Semiotics of Architecture, and it turned out to be about between 15 and 20 pages max in the English translation, and it turned out to be one of the most influential texts for architectural semiotics, probably even the most. And he says that there are basically two ways of meaning getting assigned to architecture. The first is denotation, which is meaning based solely on the function of any architectural object. Eco uses the example of the staircase, and the denotation is they can ascend them, you can walk them upwards or downwards. And there is connotation, which is the second way meaning is assigned, and that is based on the function and additional factors. So, for example, continuing the staircase, it makes a difference whether it is a straight concrete stairs or whether we're talking about a spiraling staircase, whether there are ornaments of any type of historical, architectural style, whatever. This is what changes its connotation, where they're located, if they're just in a train station, for example, or in some historical palazzo. Now, recently, Italian architectural theorist Gabriele Aroni applied Umberto Eco's theories to architecture in video games. And he generally says, he starts this chapter off with saying that when we play a game, the main action is actually interpreting and acting upon a series of signs. He then says that every architectural object in a game can be seen on three levels, semiotically. The first one, it's an iconic sign of an architectural object, or an architectural idea, I might add here. So it's depicting something. And then he goes into the two types that Eco's talking about, which are the denotation and the connotation. More detailed, that would mean the denotation is resulting from the ludic function. So we basically have, look, as an example, a wall in a video game. In Assassin's Creed, the denotation is you can scale up the wall, you can climb it, but it is still, so it's a border, but you can still use it. In Elden Ring, for example, you can climb the wall, it's a barrier. It might turn into a hidden pathway if you hit it. This would also be part of the denotation, but it is a barrier. And the connotation is again based on this ludic function and additional factors. What does the wall look like? Does it have ornaments? Does it have flowers? Does it have windows at all? Whichever. And he then says that, like concluding this chapter, he says that the secondary, the connotation, is much more important in video game architecture than it is in real life architecture, because every architectural object in a game has been put there solely for the game. So the connotation is also a way of furthering the narrative. It's basically the narrative aspect. Now, continuing with the second semiotic theory, because one wasn't enough, Roland Barthes' myth. This is something that has not yet been applied to architecture that much, a little bit to architecture in video games, but not really in detail. So basically, what Roland Barthes did was he used the semiotic system of Ferdinand de Saussure, which was limited only to language originally. And he said we expanded by adding another layer, and we expanded by using it for any cultural phenomenon. The one outlined in red here is the system that Ferdinand de Saussure used. And he basically says we have a signifier in language, for example, the word tree. The word itself, the way it sounds, is the signifier, the thing that means something. And the meaning, the signified, the second one here, is what we're talking about when we're talking about a tree. An idea of a tree, a specific tree we're pointing at, but that's basically the signified. And those two together, and the way the meaning is linked between those two, is the sign. Roland Barthes said, this sign, the first order sign, as I will call it, can be emptied of its meaning and used by a new meaning, a new signified, a second order signified, and create a new semiotic system, which Roland Barthes calls the myth. And he applies it to basically any type of cultural phenomenon. Now, how might that be applied to architecture in video games? The example here is not the best, but I think it works fine to explain it. On the left-hand side, we would have the first order signifier. So the thing that means, in this case, as an example, the Cathedral of Notre Dame, one of the most well-known examples for Gothic architecture. And the signified, in this case, of the first order, would be whatever you associate with. In this case, as I've just said, one of the best-known examples of Gothic architecture. Now, I'm arguing that this first-order sign, so the first word in the second row, is embedded in the game and turns into a signifier. So the video game of Elden Ring, for example, uses a lot of Gothic architecture. Here we have a screenshot of the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. It's not really a cathedral, so this example doesn't work perfectly, but it uses more than most other types of architecture in game Gothic architecture. Generally, in Gothic elements are very prominent in Elden Ring. And so they are put in the game and are basically emptied of their meaning, the meaning that they had before. And they're getting assigned a new meaning, which is not really related to the original architecture. In this case, the real Notre Dame is not really filled to the brink with enemies wanting to kill you, as is the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. And this sort of constitutes the second order sign. But the meaning does not completely disappear. And this is also something that Roland Barthes states. He says the form, which he calls the second order signifier, so the sign, the first sign turned into a signifier, does not suppress the meaning. It only impoverishes it, and it puts it at its distance, but it keeps it on hold. And through the concept, so the second order signified, the new meaning in the game, we get a totally new meaning, which is assigned to this. But it still needs the old one in order to function. Yeah, that was it for the dry part. Now for the quick intermission. It's not super prominent, but it does exist. There is some research going into the idea of the shelter in architecture. Disastrous and Zeros, for example, looked at it as a modular and adaptable structure. They designed these images that you can see here. They designed a tent structure that you can basically slide out and theoretically continue indefinitely. There has been research going into the user-environment relation after natural disasters. And there has also been research going into refugee shelters as temporary dwellings. And especially these last two are having a pretty strong political connotation. Now for the fun part, looking at 3 games. I look at one specific type of architecture for each of those games. There would be more, but I had to limit myself to one. Starting with Horizon Zero Dawn, we have modern ruins. I'm not going to use the term ruin porn, which has been used before. I'd rather say what DeSilvey and Edensor call romantic ruin fixation, but essentially it is the same. So we have the city that has the beautiful name Devil's Thirst in the game, or the place. It's not a city anymore because no people are living there anymore, which is based on the city of Colorado Springs, which I also mentioned at the beginning. And what these ruins basically do is that they're referencing a past in the game world. So there was something before what is happening now. And as Mark Bonner writes, the ruin is basically a remnant of a failed or somehow defeated anthroposphere and is now reconquered by nature. And we have an incredibly strong aestheticization of something that has been destroyed. And the special thing about modern ruins is, as Mats Burström writes, that we know, in contrast to ancient ruins, how they looked when they have been in use. Like, we don't know how a Greek temple, for example, an ancient Greek temple looked when it was in active use. But we know that with modern ruins. And that means that they affect us in a way which is much more direct than ancient ruins ever could. This is another city you can find on the image, based on the city of Denver. So we have cities which are probably known at least to United States players. So there is also a very important way of recognizing these cities, and this is where Roland Barthes comes in. So we have the second order sign, which are the ruins in game. They remove the meaning of the original architecture because they give it a new history, basically. From our viewpoint, a new future. So the game adds its own meaning to these architecture, but it still needs the old meaning in order to function. We still need to be able to recognize those ruins, because otherwise they wouldn't mean anything. Now, concluding the part of Horizon Zero Dawn, there is also the idea of hope connected to ruins, especially modern ruins. As Emma Fraser writes, the fact that we have explorable ruins, that we have ruins that we can climb up, that we can run around in, also means that we accept that another history is possible. Now, after the hopeful and green place that the world of Horizon Zero Dawn is, let's go to a less hopeful and less green place, the post-apocalyptic wasteland of Fallout 4. I'm here looking at these temporary shelters. There are also the Fallout shelters, which is the term used partly for the bunkers. They're also valid architecture, but I'm looking here at these temporary structures. So what is the special thing about them? Well, we can see this ties into what Joshua Sawyer said. We have these rusted metal sheets. We have these rough wooden pillars. So we have these rough and not quite finished materials. And this means basically that we have few materials available. And the fact that we have few materials also demonstrates that the means to produce these materials have somehow been lost. So something must have happened in the past. Again, these shelters are referencing a past in order for people to have these materials once, but not being able to produce them anymore. And this might be a gameplay decision, but these shelters, which you can actually build yourself in the game, are highly modular. Another thing that I found quite interesting is that the fact that the people build such temporary things means that the current situation is not really accepted. Otherwise, they would have built more durable stuff. Like they would have built buildings which do not look like they would fall apart with the next breeze. And this means that they believe that they're in a transitional period and they still have the hope, they're still holding on to the hope of reinstating the former status quo. But it also shows a will to survive in trying circumstances. Yeah, but you can not only build your own shelter, you can also decorate its interior. And this makes it more livable. And this is, again, somehow a contradiction, because why bother if it could fall apart at any time anyway? Why should I put in the work to make it livable? So this contradicts this temporary logic. And another thing that's quite interesting is that even after a few hundred years, most functions of the current dwelling that we have right now are represented in these interior decorations. So we have toilets, we have radios, we have fridges, and we have sofas. And this is where Umberto Eco and Gabriele Aroni are entering the discussion. The real-life sofa denotes its function, so being able to sit down or being able to lie down. And it connotes the living area, because sofas are usually placed in the living area, or here on the stage. The in-game sofa also denotes its in-game function. You can play it, and you can place it, and you can sit down there. But it is placed in the game to specifically connote, so the second function, the living area. It makes us feel as if we were in a living area. And it actually is the same with the rug, even with the radio, although the video game radio also retains its real-life function because we can listen to it in the game. So summarizing this, the connotation is the important factor of these objects to make the interior feel like a cozy living space, while the exterior gives off this dangerous post-disaster, post-nuclear wasteland vibes through its materiality and its transitional character. And now for an even darker place, the ancient ruins of Elden Ring. Generally, architecture plays a monumental role in the game. The landscape is littered with buildings in different stages of decay. This is the key art, so it's basically a press photo, and you cannot really, it's not a screenshot, but this is one of these things, the longer you look at it, the more ruins you will find. We can talk about it in a break, how many each of you found. And these ruins, as Marco Caracciolo writes in his book On Souls Ring Worlds, which is focusing specifically on the world building of Souls-like games, he writes it about the Sky Temple. So it speaks to an archaeological mindset. It makes the players want to find out what happened to these buildings. And I'm arguing that what Caracciolo states here can be applied actually to almost any type of architecture in Elden Ring, because we mainly have ruins there. Now, applying Eco's theory, or Eco and Aroni's theory, this is Stormvale Castle. And its denoted function is it basically has two functions. It's housing enemies, and it's offering a labyrinthian-like obstacle to the players. The connotation, due to its presentation also with like the dark storm clouds and everything, and the dark title Stormvale Castle, it's dark and foreboding. It's filled with dangerous enemies. But its ruined state also demonstrates its history, both in the sense that there is a past in this fictional world, as well as that things were better once. So something had to have happened in order for this place to look as it does now. But despite its ruined state, it still retains some measure of its sublimity. So they still seem very, very powerful and strong. Now I'm giving you a content warning for the next slide. The image is rather gross and violent. You have been warned. I even had to lighten it up and make it a little brighter in order to make it more visible. So I would like to have you focus. I'll have to show you on the arches, which you can see. And yeah, I don't think this thing has a laser pointer, does it? Yeah. So we have, again, in this case, I'm using Roland Barthes' theory. We have the real-life castle interior, which would be the first order sign. And this is placed in the game, but it gets a new history. It gets new enemies. It shows that the game has a history. It also uses the medieval connotation, if you want to use Eco's term here. It uses the medieval connotation of its original, but it gives it a new history. And with that, I'm already at the conclusion. Where does this leave us? Yeah, we have different types of post-apocalyptic atmosphere in each of these games. We have the green and vibrant, overgrown modern ruins of Horizon Zero Dawn. We have the bleak post-nuclear crisis wasteland with precarious shelters, which still are having somehow a cozy interior in Fallout 4. And we have Elven Rings, dark labyrinthian medieval ruins, which are full of enemies. And architecture plays an important role in the way these worlds make players feel, and it is assigned new meanings by the activities the players can perform in them. So additionally to the meanings these architectural objects bring with them into the game world from their real-life counterparts, the activities are adding new meanings to these architectural objects. Whether it is getting lost in a jungle and finding out it's the ruins of some ancient skyscraper, whether it is sitting down on your sofa in your cozy shelter with the radio on, or whether it is being hunted by some angry knight who's definitely not happy to see us. Thank you.